Prepare to be emotionally shaken by the harsh reality facing the United States. A devastating wave of evictions is about to hit the country, and it is not merely a reflection of the dire housing crisis we are facing. It's a stark reminder that the system is rigged against us, preventing us from building equity through home ownership and forcing us into renting properties that are becoming increasingly expensive and precarious. The situation is so dire that even middle-class suburbs are facing a higher risk of evictions than lower and upper-income neighborhoods. Poverty levels are on the rise again, and the middle class is being hollowed out. The cost of rent is a burden on virtually everyone in the country, and experts are warning that housing insecurity will be the future of the vast majority of the population. It's outrageous that affluent investors control 40% of single-family rental homes and hike rent prices to astronomical heights. The rental market distortions are getting so extreme that we are at risk of a major crisis. It's a truly concerning and shocking problem that needs to be urgently addressed. We kindly ask you to support our work with a thumbs up and to subscribe to our channel to stay informed about this pressing issue. Housing advocates are sounding the alarm about the looming wave of evictions that will impact millions of American adults and children in 2023. The latest research from Princeton University's Eviction Lab reveals that middle-class households are facing the highest risk of eviction. For the longest time, stable housing in safe neighborhoods has been a crucial component of financial and personal security for middle-income Americans. However, the latest data shows that with each passing month, more and more middle-class households are being priced out of their neighborhoods. The situation is truly distressing, and we need to take action as a society to find solutions that provide affordable housing for all, regardless of income. It's heartbreaking to see that hardworking, middle-class families are being forced out of their homes, and the lack of resources to support them is only exacerbating the problem. The heartbreaking truth is that the American dream of stable housing and a safe neighborhood is slipping away for middle-class families across the country. According to Princeton researchers, the number of evictions in middle-class suburbs is at an all-time high, growing faster than evictions in low-income neighborhoods. It's devastating to see that in the Cleveland-Elyria, Ohio metropolitan area, evictions of middle-income households have risen by a staggering 55%. This is a stark reminder that housing precarity and homelessness are not just issues faced by lower-income Americans. Scott Taylor, a professor of public policy at the University of Washington in Seattle, notes that the lack of affordable housing resources is leaving many middle-class Americans in the suburbs at risk of eviction. This is a problem that affects everyone, as the system is rigged against building equity through home ownership and forces us into renting properties that are becoming increasingly expensive and precarious. It's outrageous that affluent investors control 40% of single-family rental homes and hike rent prices to astronomical heights. It's a harsh reality that people who have always called the suburbs home are facing increasingly dire circumstances, as rising inflation and stagnant wages are making them poorer by the day. The once thriving middle class is slipping below the poverty line as high-paying manufacturing jobs in the suburbs dry up, replaced by low-paying service and retail jobs that leave workers in a precarious financial situation. As if that weren't enough, experts warn that rent prices are set to rise even further this summer, triggering a major eviction crisis and leaving middle-class and former middle-class renters struggling to find a place to call home. The current housing market is so tight that it's virtually impossible for millions of middle-income earners to start building wealth through home ownership. Prospective homebuyers are forced to contend not only with high mortgage rates and home values but also fierce competition from investors with deep pockets. According to estimates from MetLife Investment Management, Wall Street investors are poised to control as much as 40% of single-family rental homes by 2027. This is disastrous for the rental market as a whole. The problem with Wall Street taking an interest in the rental market is twofold. Not only does it make it harder for middle-class families to find affordable housing, but it also drives up rent prices to astronomical levels, making it even more challenging for families to make ends meet. It's an alarming situation that demands urgent action to ensure that every hardworking American has access to stable and affordable housing. The suburbs, once a symbol of the American dream, are now rife with poverty and economic insecurity. Middle-class families who have lived in these areas for generations are struggling to keep their heads above water as inflation rises and wages remain stagnant. As high-paying manufacturing jobs disappear, service and retail jobs that pay far less have replaced them, leaving workers in a precarious financial position. With rent prices set to rise even further this summer, the possibility of a major eviction crisis looms large. Middle-class and former middle-class renters could find themselves struggling to find a place to live, as the housing market tightens and competition from wealthy investors intensifies. Estimates suggest that by 2027, Wall Street investors could control up to 40% of single-family rental homes, further limiting the number of homes available to average Americans. This is a bad thing for the rental market as a whole. If investors take over the rental market, they will almost certainly hike rental prices even higher, creating a major affordability crunch for those in need of a roof over their heads. Corporate landlords, in particular, have a reputation for their ruthlessness, filing almost 4 times as many evictions as small property owners, even during the pandemic. Eviction is a traumatic and destructive experience for families who face it, and the rates are expected to continue rising throughout the year. To make matters worse, the median rent in the US has increased by 2.4% in February, reaching almost $2,000. With the average rent for a one-bedroom apartment now at $1,942, the highest level since June 2021, many Americans are finding it increasingly difficult to keep up with rising housing costs. The fact that there's a shortage of available housing only exacerbates the problem, leaving many uncertain about their economic future and unable to move to more affordable areas. According to researchers, a staggering 44 million renters are spending 30% or more of their income on rent, which is what Moody's Analytics calls a rent burden. This burden is particularly heavy for low-income workers, who lose up to 55% of their pay just to cover rent. These individuals are considered severely housing cost burdened and are just one unexpected event away from being evicted from their homes. Even middle-income households are feeling the pinch. Renting a 2-bedroom apartment in most metropolitan areas requires them to allocate a whopping 41% of their incomes toward rent every month. The disparity between rent growth and income growth continues to widen, putting further financial stress on American households. In fact, while incomes have increased by 26% since 2015, housing prices have risen by a staggering 77% nationwide. As if the situation isn't dire enough, the threat of evictions looms large for many renters. Moody's reports that renters in states like Georgia, Louisiana, and South Carolina are particularly vulnerable. In Maryland and Arizona, over 20% of tenants are at risk of being evicted. Roughly 15% of all households in America are behind on at least one rent payment, indicating that the problem is widespread and growing. Despite these alarming statistics, little is being done to address the affordable housing crisis. Even as Americans' wallets feel the squeeze, rent prices continue to climb, with less than 40% of renters seeing their wages increase over the past year. It's a vicious cycle that's leaving many people in dire straits. As Moody's economists warn, unless something changes soon, America's affordable housing crisis is only going to get worse. The housing crisis in America is pushing more and more people to the brink of financial ruin. It's a crisis that touches every corner of the country, affecting people of all ages, backgrounds, and income levels. The latest data shows that the situation is getting worse by the day, with millions of Americans struggling to pay rent and keep a roof over their heads. The burden is especially heavy for middle-class families, who are facing eviction at an alarming rate. For many of these families, the dream of owning a home is slipping further out of reach, as Wall Street investors gobble up properties and drive up rental prices to astronomical heights. The numbers are staggering, with 44 million American renters spending more than 30% of their income on rent, leaving little room for anything else. In many cases, people are spending more than half of their paychecks just to cover rent, leaving them one paycheck away from homelessness. It's a situation that is leaving families feeling helpless and hopeless, wondering how they will make ends meet. The data is alarming, and the prognosis is grim. Experts warn that the housing crisis is only going to get worse, with inflation and stagnant wages pushing more people into poverty every day. For many Americans, housing insecurity is becoming the new normal, a way of life that is characterized by uncertainty, fear, and despair. Yet, despite the grim outlook, people are finding ways to cope. They are tapping into their 401k plans for financial support, relying on friends and family for help, and doing whatever it takes to keep a roof over their heads. But the truth is, they shouldn't have to struggle like this. Housing is a basic human right, and it's time for America to step up and provide affordable, quality housing for all of its citizens. The housing crisis in America is more than just a reflection of the dire situation we face. It's a symptom of a rigged system that doesn't allow us to build equity through home ownership. The truth is that millions of Americans are facing eviction and homelessness due to rising inflation, stagnant wages, and a lack of affordable housing resources. Middle-class families, who were once able to afford decent quality stable housing in safe neighborhoods, are now facing the highest risk of eviction, as their jobs have been replaced by lower-paying positions in the service and retail sectors. Even those who earn a minimum wage are finding it hard to pay their rent, let alone make ends meet. The housing market has become so tight that middle-income owners are struggling to start building wealth through home ownership, while Wall Street investors control as much as 40% of single-family rental homes, hiking rent prices to astronomical heights. The rental market is becoming increasingly ruthless, with corporate landlords filing almost 4 times more evictions than small property owners, leaving families in a cycle of instability and insecurity in their housing. The rise in hardship withdrawals from 401k plans is a reflection of just how dire the situation has become. Government officials have fueled the growth of the largest housing bubble, allowing investors to snatch up the supply of homes that would otherwise be bought by American families. The dream of home ownership has been dismantled, and housing insecurity has become the new normal. Evictions disrupt every aspect of people's lives, from their health and relationships to their job and their children's education. And for those who may lose their jobs and source of income, losing their homes won't just be a result of our current housing crisis. It'll be an everything crisis.